Hello everyone and welcome back. In today's video we are taking a look at some lists from the mtgo online trophy and of course also from the top 8 from some Pauper challenge, at least from the last week. So we are taking a look exactly at 4 points. The first one, mono red aggro. We can call the first one mono red slide, and there's also mono red blitz or mono red prowess. So basically why those decks are played and why they are good right now. Then we take a look at the reception rate and why they're starting playing snuff out. And also there's Burst Metrocraft, which is currently running Terra Stripe. It can be kind of curious to see that both Burst Metrocraft and the Reception Rate basically are running a combo finisher. And then we take a look at Affinity or Burst Metrocraft, which is kind of weird, sort of mishmash between the two decks, forming a unique deck running both Affinity card and Boros Metrocraft cards. And finally take a look at the last part of the deck list that got a trophy in the mtgo league. Specifically, Rakdos Sacrifice to me seems the most interesting one. Alright. Okay. The first one is Mono Red Heroic. Mono Red Heroic is a really old deck in Pauper. It started in playing since the first Teros, and the name comes from both Chron Crusader and Satyr Oplate. So basically the deck is pretty similar to Mono Red Blitz and Mono White Heroic, because it runs some creatures and a huge amount, a fair huge amount of instant or sorcery or enchantment spells that they are used as a way to power up the creature to try to kill the opponent as fast as possible. So basically the deck is similar in a certain way to our X-Proof, because it tries to have a creature on the battlefield by turn 1 or turn 2 and then play a bunch of non-creature spells just to try to make it bigger and bigger and eventually evasive. I think it's important to note that this kind of deck is also running Kill Fiend, and that's the reason why right now is also difficult to understand when it's Mono Red Blitz and when is Mono Red Heroic, because the deck feels pretty similar. Most times we can see the Mono Red Blitz running both Kill Fiend and Festival Crusher. Festival Crusher is the devil creatures similar to Kill Fiend, and they usually run only 12 creatures, and as the third playset they run Satyr Oplate, because Satyr Oplate doesn't cost 2 mana, but since is not good as Kill Fiend, but it still costs only 1 mana, so you can't kill your opponent as fast as playing a Kill Fiend, but it comes on the battlefield earlier, so it may be better in certain situations. And the bonus is a +1/+1 counter, so it remains on the creature until the game is over. I think it's important to note that both Mono Red Blades and Mono Red Heroic can run Simian Spirit Guide, not as a creature, but as a way to have fast mana. So basically it's kind of a Lotus Petal, which doesn't cost something like 40 ticks just to buy it. It's a cheaper version of Lotus Beetle, basically. Also, they can't counter it. The deck doesn't have anything weird, but it's just mono red blitz with the heroic card in certain ways. So now we are taking a look at mono red blitz just to see how much different is the deck compared to mono red heroic. Or at least if I'm able to find it. Okay, here we go. So there's Festival Crusher, which is weaker compared to Kingpin because it doesn't get +3 +0, but just +2 +0. But there's no other creatures good as Festival Crusher. And this list is running Mage Ring Bully as an alternative to Satyr Oplit. If you ask me which is better, I don't really know, but the good part about Mage Ring Bully is that it has prowess instead of heroic, so you don't really need to target it to power it up, and also is a 2/2 creature, not a 1/1 creature, and usually doesn't really matter to give counters on it, because you usually kill your opponent in 1 or 2 turns, regardless of which creature you play. So I guess that Mage Ring Bully has just better stats when it doesn't come to the ability itself. And as you can see, Mage Ring Bully has also a malus because it is forced to attack each turn. But I guess that having a so low creature amount and also having so many pump spells means that you usually just try to win as fast as possible. So you usually try to attack each turn with only one single creature. That's, as you can see, there's a lot of non-creature spells that are just meant to try to play in the same way as Modern or Pioneer mono red prowess decks works. A lot of cycling cards, for example Metamorphose and Ancestral Anger, and because this kind of deck usually waste a lot of resources trying to kill the opponent, and also due to the creature's ability you want to play a lot of spells, so you run a lot of cards that are placing themselves, and then just try to find Tremor Battle Rage or Apostos Blessing to make the creature unblockable, basically. Deck is, I think, kind of cool by itself. I mean, I'm not a fan of this kind of strategies because it is truly weak to 1-for-1 removal spells and also edicts. So when we are playing, example, deck filled with removal spells, you are usually favored against this kind of glass cannon decks. Probably Mono Red Blitz and Mono Red Heroic are well positioned in the current metagame, but mostly because in the leagues and maybe also in the challenges there aren't a lot of removal spells decks, because the current format is mostly reliant on value cards, as you can see, for example, by taking a look at an affinity like list. You can see that they're running something like 16 or more cards that are able to draw 2 cards: Tocast, Dispute, Recurrence Bargain, and of course Eco Wellspring. And they usually run only for Galvanic Blast as a removal spells. They also may have Kraken Shaman and Makeshift Munitions, but those cards usually requires more artifacts just to deal the same amount of damage that Galvanic Blast does, and also the affinity doesn't run a lot of removal spells in their sideboards. Yeah, they may have Generous Edict and also Cast Down, but usually they don't have a lot of life gain spells, and of course they don't have a lot of Cast Down or Generous Edict effects in their sideboard. So for that reason, and also because they may be faster than any other deck, Mono Red Blades, in my opinion, can be good in a metagame filled with non-interactive deck. Also, sometimes you are able to play your Kill Fiend just to force your opponent to blast it, and maybe you also have your Apostle's Blessing or Mutagenic Growth just to protect your creature from your opponent's removal, which makes it also difficultier to interact with Mono Red Blades. I also talked about Mono Red Slag, but what is Mono Red Slag? So basically, Slag is a name that was given to Mono Red aggressive strategies before the name Red Queens, and basically is pretty similar to Mono Red to Red Queens or Mono Red Goblins. Of course, isn't exactly the same deck, but almost it is. And I'm calling it Mono Red Slag just because it's different compared to the Mono Red Red Queens that is currently played in Pauper. As you can see, there's no there aren't here the 1 mana 2/2 creatures that usually are present in the Red Queens. Red Queen is filled with 2/2 creatures, so since the print of Free Cannonade isn't really played a lot, and the deck played by Ponderous Zeta, in my opinion, is pretty solid and also really cool. This deck seems really good. I mean, not sure that this deck is good in the metagame filled with interactive strategies, but we can say that when the metagame allows Mono Red Blitz to be good, probably the Mono Red deck played by Ponderous is also good. I think that the interaction of this deck between the Metalcraft, between the artifacts and Cultivator Bird and Galvanic Blast are truly powerful. Also, there is Goblin Bushwalker, which is one of the most powerful cards in any Mono Red aggressive deck. Then we can see there's Pity Burning Tremissary and Voldaren Epicure as a creature. So, since the metagame seems to be filled with Free Cannonade and Crackling Shaman, this deck is not trying to have a great amount of big creatures, but they're just trying to have the most powerful creatures, at least when it comes to damage. So it's running Burning Tremissary and Cultivator Bird because they have a very good rate. Cultivator Bird is 3 on power with only 1 red mana, and BTE cost 0 mana basically. And there's Gingerbread, I think mostly because there is Cultivator Bird. Voldaren Epicure isn't really great, but it deals 1 damage, and by creating the blood token, you make possible to play Cultivator Bird. So the deck is very similar to Red Queens, as I already said, because we have a pretty good start in the early game, and then there's the burn damage dealt by Lightning Bolt, Galvanic Blast, and of course Makeshift Munitions. And Makeshift Munitions isn't even bad here, because there are a bunch of artifacts in form of Eagle Wellspring, Synthesizer, Chromatic Star, the Artifact Lens, and you also have the creatures, so you can also sacrifice your creatures with munitions, of course. I think is also pretty cool. Ponderosa was running Monomorphose, not because it's good in the deck, but because it allows you also with Chromatic Star to cast a Burning Tremissary, fix the green mana into red, and then cast Goblin Bushwalker, making Burning Tremissary into Goblin Bushwalker a powerful endgame. A similar list was able to top 8 in last Sunday, if I remember correct, last Sunday or last Saturday Pauper Challenge, but wasn't Red Queens, was Mono-Red Goblins, which is pretty similar, so basically the same deck, but it runs Goblins Leader and Mock Rider, which means that you don't have a lot of creatures, but you have somewhat good creatures. I mean, Goblin's Letter and Mock Raider, those creatures always were good as a way to pass throughout the opponent's blockers, because if your opponent block your creature, you can just sacrifice it, so you deal the damage that potentially you wanted to deal to your opponent by just pumping another creature, or you can just kill your opponent creature by sacrificing, in example, Mokur Marshal or Predatory Burst. So there isn't Galvanic Blast here, but there are still Bouldering Epicure, Experimental Synthesizer, and Great Furnace. And there's also Goblin Grenade, which is still good because it's 5 damage with only 1 mana. You sacrifice your creature, but that doesn't really matter. I mean, you're just trying to kill your opponent by turn 4. I'm not a fan of these kind of strategies, because you usually kind of fold whenever you draw too many lands, or you don't draw Goblin Bushwalker or enough burn spells. But if the metagame doesn't have any answer, these kind of decks usually are good, as I already said. So why Azeris Ephemerate started playing Snuff-Out? Well, because Snuff-Out is just good, because it costs 0 mana, so 120 dragons got the second place in the Pauper Show Chase challenge in last Saturday with familiars, and he was also running 4 copies of Snuff-Out. So basically, in this kind of control deck, Snuff-Out help you against Furies first, and also against beatdown strategies, because you can just kill your opponent creature instead of snap it, and Snuff-Out isn't really bad as a removal spell when you don't lose too much life thanks to Ghostfair's Faithful, because Ghostfair's Faithful get you lives whenever you cast a blue, black or red spell. So I was already a fan of the idea of playing Get Shot in a familiar sideboard, just to have a better removal spell than Last Breath against Mono Blue Furies, when Mono Blue Furies was tier 1 in the Pauper Challenge. But right now Mono Blue Furies isn't played a lot, so Get Shot isn't much good, but there is another free spell which is Snuff-Out, and is better compared to Snap, and I also think that adding Snap Out in familiar is good. I mean, you are forced to play the basic swamp or some cards like Acid Tunnel, but I guess that doesn't really matter a lot because you usually don't need a lot of lands of the secondary color in this deck. You usually want to have only islands and then one land of the other color, which usually is white because Familiars is a blue-white deck. Also, they're just trying to have less copy of Sunscape Familiar, so the deck is going deeper and deeper down to the control role, so it's less combo and more control nowadays. And there's no even Sigil of the Nizen in the main deck, and even not the Sigil of the Nizen in the sideboard. So here the only combo is have two Sunscape Familiar on the battlefield. I mean the infinite combo. Have two familiars on the battlefield, one Archmancer, one Ghostly Flicker, one or two Archmancer, and one Ghostly Flicker. And the last piece of the combo is Good Spirit Faithful if you want to get infinite life by blanking Archmancer and an island, or you can have infinite snap if you have two copies of Archmancer and one Ghostly Flicker, because you untap two blue sources when you play Snap. So basically your Ghostly Flicker costs 0 mana, and then you bounce all the creatures on the battlefield, or at least all your opponent's creatures on the battlefield. If you are untapping a couple of bounce lands, you can generate infinite white mana, but you don't do anything with infinite white mana in this deck. But why I'm talking about Azorius Ephemerate instead of Azorius Familiar? Because there's also Carves that was running a similar deck, but instead of winning with Ghostly Flicker and Faithful, they're winning with Tireless Tribe and Shadow Rift. So I'm not sure if Carves started playing this deck by adding Muldrifter and Ephemerate to the Tireless Tribe combo deck, or if they just tried to play Azorius Familiar without familiars and with Tireless Tribe as win con. But the idea seems similar to Familiar, so it's a control combo deck. Sometimes can win with Tireless Tribe just to have a better matchup and a faster game against certain decks. You are also forcing your opponent to run bot 8 against Tribe and 8 against an Ephemerate deck. And Inside Out can be a removal spells when it comes to walls creatures, because you're switching the creature power and constitution, so you're killing every creature with only 0 on power. I definitely really don't like the idea of playing only 3 copies of Muldrifter and also 2 copies of Ogre of Bolas. It seems pretty weak in a deck with only 25 spells, but when you are running 3 copies of Ephemerate, probably your Ogre of Bolas doesn't really matter a lot. I mean, you can play Seagate Oracle, but whatever. By playing Ogre of Bolas, you just want to land as fast as possible your 1/3 creature to turn block and play on it 1 or 2 Ephemerate. You aren't drawing a lot of cards maybe, but you are still generating card advantage. Of course, as you can see, there's also Snuff Out, so basically the Carves probably copied or Carves or Dragon. One of those 2 players probably was able to see that the other players was running Snuff Out to the deck, so they decided to, both of them, that Snuff Out was good with an Ephemerate, because by playing ephemerate, targeting your commands or bringing back snap out. Basically you are just playing something similar to blow shares to your opponent creatures. It is pretty strong. Metalcraft Affinity. No, there's first Tireless Tribe in Billster's Boros deck. Basically, Boros Metalcraft, splashing for Boros Pule with Squadron Oak, Vitalist Looting, and Prismatic Strands, but they are also running Tireless Tribe, and in my opinion is pretty weird, but they were able to get the first place on the Pauper challenge, so probably it worked. The cool thing is that Science Wedding Invitation is basically the same card as Shadow Rift and the same card as Prophetic Prism. They are running Wedding Invitation for both Terror's Tribe and Glint Hooks, and it's pretty cool. But it's kind of weird that they're running Experimental Terror's Tribe in a deck which has Experimental Synthesizer, because Experimental Synthesizer doesn't draw the cards, it exiled them. So I guess they think that thanks to Experimental Synthesizer they're playing cards from their top of the deck and not from their hand, so they have either changes to win with Tireless Tribe. Maybe not in the early game, but maybe since they're not even running Galvanic Blast, they think of Tireless Tribe as an alternative way to win against the opponent with something similar as a Fireball, because you can have a sort of 2 cards Fireball effect, similar to Channel Fireball. I mean, you can discard 5 or more cards with Tireless Tribe just to deal something like 21 damage. So you can play the early game as a Boros deck, trying to put your opponent down to something like 15 or less life, and then win with Tireless Tribe, or just play an early game Tireless Tribe and then win on turn 2 or turn 3 with Tireless Tribe, which is still pretty solid. Cool deck in certain ways. Also, you have Squadron Oak as a way to discard more cards with Tireless Tribe. So basically, it's a mishmash of 3 different decks. As already said, mishmash, we are also taking a look at this deck, which is running Glyphine, Mirror Enforcer, and Deadly Dispute from Affinity, but is also running Glint Hook, Korsky Fisher, Seeker of the Way, and Experimental Synthesizer. So basically is Affinity, because it has the same mana base as Affinity, all artifact lands, but it's also Boros Metalcraft, because it's running Glint Hook and Korsky Fisher. It's kind of weird, this deck, because I mean, the deck clearly works because it has good cards and can kill you by swinging a lot of damage, but in my opinion it's weird that they're running only 4 Galvanic Blast and only 1 Makeshift Munitions. Especially Munition is incredible when you are running only artifact lands, and since it has the same mana base as Affinity, not having the second copy of Munitions seems just bad to me. Also, they're running 2 copies of Blood Fountain instead of 4, and I think that isn't the right choice when we are running Glyphine, because Glyphine truly shines when you are running 4 copies of Blood Fountain. And also, why playing only 3 Experimental Synthesizer when you are running 4 Korsky Fisher and 4 Glint Hook? That's weird. Probably I'll cut Glyphine or Seeker of the Way, or both of them, just to play Lightning Bolt, the 4th copy of Experimental Synthesizer, and Makeshift Nations. You can eventually also add the other 2 copies of Blood Fountain, or even just not play any Blood Fountain at all, because you don't really need to have a lot of creatures when you have a lot of reach, or eventually you just 4 copies of Blood Fountain because it's just good, and having Blood Fountain that brings back you Glintook when you have an experimental synthesizer on the battlefield seems just too good. And I think that, anyway, I think Mirror Enforcer and Glazefiend, when you have Glintook and Korsky Fisher as valued cards, seems just weird, because I'm not accustomed to see or just to play Glintook and Korsky Fisher alongside Mirror Enforcer, but it's not something new in Pauper, since, for example, Sky Affinity was a thing before the E2 ban. The people was playing, for example, of One Mind, Artner Recruit, or Glintook, Korsky Fisher, and Eco Wellspring. The deck was still working fine. Finally, we take a look at Rakdos Sacrifice and other decks. Example, HJC was able to get a trophy with Esper Ephemerate. Esper Ephemerate with a couple of new cards. Example, Shattered Seraph from New Capena. No, there's only Shattered Seraph from New Capena. Anyway, deck is another UV blue-white Ephemerate deck, which is running Black Removal spells. Is also running Late to Dinner and the Modern Age and Mirror Shell Crab. So basically, is an service Ephemerate deck that tries the Reanimator's alternative Gunplane alongside the black mana spells. So basically, all of these Azorius Ephemerate decks are something like combo control deck that are playing black instead of red as a way to destroy the creatures in a better way compared to white removal spells, or compared to Snap, which is a blue kind of like a removal spell. Deck is cool, and I think you can also check Aizen01 YouTube channel if you want to see a league with that deck, because if I remember correctly, he recorded a league with that deck. And finally, we should go to Cosmic Charles Rakdos Sacrifice deck. This deck is truly cool because it's Rakdos Sacrifice and also is running Body Dropper. So with Mortician Beetle has 4 copies of Body Dropper, and probably the weakest part is having only 4 copies of Carrion Feeder, because Carrion Feeder is the best sacrifice outlet, and okay, you can play Bogarton Dragon Hat, you can play Makeshift Munitions, you can also play Deadly Dispute and Village Rites as a way to sacrifice your creatures, but if you try to go bigger and try to kill as fast as possible your opponent, probably Carrion Feeder is still the best card. Deck is cool. Also, Bogarton Dragon Heart seems pretty great because when you sacrifice a creature, it becomes a 4/4 flying creature, but it also gets haste, so you can tap 3 mana just to deal 4 damage and still have a creature on the battlefield. It's also pretty cool that that Cosmic Charles is running 2 copies of Dragon Egg, and Dragon Egg seems just a pretty funny card. I mean, I'm not sure if the card is good because you need to sacrifice it just to create a 2/2 flying creature, but the token, you can pump it by tapping 1 red mana. It's evasive and it's a 2/2 creature, which is of course better than example Nested Shambler token. Of course, Nested Shambler is still great because is the only black creature that costs only 1 mana and generate 1 token when you sacrifice it. And another cool part of this deck is that there is more War Marshals, which is pretty similar to Cool Turtles. Eventually, you can try a different approach of this deck by running in a similar way of the previous deck that we were able to see in this video. So you can run Experimental Synthesizer and Cool Board, because why not running the Eco Wildspring or Experimental Synthesizer when you are playing Deadly Dispute? I mean, Deadly Dispute is still good as a way to sacrifice creatures because you generate a lot with Spital, but if you add Creature Bird, if you add Experimental Synthesizer, why not try a different approach when it comes to the aggro gameplay? So you can still have bigger creature, but you can also run more. You can also run Goblin Bushwalker, which seems great, but because you can fix red mana with Deadly Dispute, but also you have more War Marshal, and eventually you can play Goblin's Ladder. For example, I faced while recording a league with Hordes of Pestilence, with Hordes of Mithral's Pestilence. I faced a Rakdos Sacrifice deck that was running both Experimental Synthesizer, Cool Robot, and Goblin's Ladder, and of course was running the same shell with Carrion Feeder, Body Dropper, and more War Marshal and Mortician Beetle. I think I would likely try something like that list. Well, we talked about everything. I just wanted to show you the Facebook event of the Pauper Geddon, which will be played on Pisa, in Pisa on July 3rd. Sadly, the event already is sold out after 24 hours. Because the tickets were available from Thursday, but they went sold out in something like 24 hours. And so, when the previous Pauper in Milan only had 200 seats available, this one had 300. So it's still great because people truly want to play Pauper in real, and I'm gonna participate in it, and I really hope that the event will eventually went really well. I mean, it's something like 9-turn Swiss Pauper tournament. Will probably will become the bigger Pauper tournament in Real, at least the bigger Pauper tournament with top 8, because in London was played a Pauper tournament with 302 players, but it hadn't any top 8, only 5 rounds Swiss, because it was a side event. And this one instead is a real competitive event, which will be much better for the format, because the format, at least in paper, is important, and would be really cool to have more events like this when it comes to Pauper. So guys, thank you for watching this video. I'll see you next week, and starting next week I'll also starting recording leaks of decks that I previously played only on Twitch, so basically decks recorded only on Italian. And the important part is that I'll start recording leak in English, specific for the channel audience which doesn't speak Italian. I think that would be a nice thing to do for you guys, hoping you are able to enjoy the thing, and see you next week.